Good evening, all. Good evening, my dear students. Welcome to the fourth module of the PG training program conducted by the Kozhikode Ophthalmic Society. As you all know, today we have a very important topic, diplopia charting and HES charting, from the examination point of view as well as in the ophthalmic practice. And to deal with this important topic, we have with us a great teacher and academician, Dr. Sanitha Satyan. She's a senior consultant in pediatric ophthalmology from Chaitanya Eye Hospital, Kochi. A warm welcome, Sanitha, from all of us.
Thank you, madam.
I think most of you must have heard a talk in our Kozhikode Ophthalmic Society in the initial scientific meetings. It was a wonderful talk. Now, once again, I request all my PGs to make the session very interactive and clear all their doubts. And I'm sure Dr. Sanitha will help them with all small tips from examination point of view. So Sanitha, be ready they'll be having lots of questions, I hope.
Okay, madam.
Okay. Let us welcome Dr. Nirmal, consultant pediatric ophthalmologist from Compras Eye Hospital, to moderate the session. And now over to Dr. Mihir, the backbone of this training program, to introduce the speaker. Thank you all and best of luck. Okay, Mihir.
So thank you, madam. So good evening all. Welcome to the fourth module of our PG exam buster series. We have with us today Dr. Sanitha Satyan, who's a well-known figure in the field of pediatric ophthalmology and strabismus. So Dr. Sanitha did her DNB in ophthalmology from Little Flower Hospital, Angamali. She did her fellowship in pediatric ophthalmology and strabismus from the same institute. She worked as a consultant and associate professor in pediatric ophthalmology at Little Flower Hospital, Angamali. She has to her credit many paper and poster presentations at international, national and state level conferences. For lack of time, I would not try to enumerate the numerous publications and presentations which she has presented. She is currently working as a senior consultant in pediatric ophthalmology at Chaitanya Eye Institute, Cochin. She wants this session to be a very interactive session, and she said that she will be asking a few questions to the postgraduates. So I request all the postgraduates to not feel shy and on their mics and on their videos and answer the questions. It is all for your benefit that we are going through all these exercises. So Dr. Nirmal, who is a consultant in pediatric ophthalmology at Compras Eye Hospital, is going to moderate this session. So I hand over to Dr. Nirmal.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to thank Kozhikode Ophthalmic Society, our very vibrant president and secretary, for initiating such a program. I finished my post-graduation, say 5 years back. I wish I were doing my post-graduation right now in Kerala or Kozhikode. To be frank, to that extent, I am impressed with all the work that our society has been doing. And regarding Sanitha madam, I think her words would prove better than my words. She's a really good teacher. I have had the opportunity to listen to madam's class, and the way she was answering in the quiz was also mind-blowing. So I hope all the postgraduates will have a really good session. Make sure you will be taking down notes. Okay, don't be under the impression that you can later on go on to YouTube, or whenever the recorded version comes, you can note it down. It's better to listen to the class and take down notes and note down your questions. You can enter it in the chat box as well. Okay, over to you, Sanitha madam. Hope you have a wonderful session.
Okay, thank you, Nirmal. I hope I'm audible to all of you. At the outset, I would like to thank the Kozhikode Ophthalmic Society and its dynamic leaders, Dr. Sujit, Dr. Mihir, Vijayalakshmi ma'am, and also Nirmal, for having me here. And then I'm actually flattered by all your words, and I sincerely hope that I can do some justice to what was told just now. I think the whole idea of this PG program is to make topics simpler, so that the PGs can and understand them better, and also perform in their exams and also in their ophthalmic career better. So that's why I would like to have a good discussion. Because it's online, there are a few limitations, I know, but we'll try to make it as interactive as possible. And diplopia charting is one subject where most of the PGs are a little scared of, or me recalling myself as a PG, I was really scared of what is going on with these green and red lights. And I had no clue regarding what it was. So see, the most important thing is you understand the basic concepts and go systematically step by step. It's a very simple topic. Any person can understand it. So please listen carefully, and then we'll go straight into the topic. So as Nirmal told, there will be a question session for PG. So don't leave the meeting. These are all very simple questions. If you attend carefully, you are sure to answer those. Okay, so let's start. So diplopia chart is basically a record of separation of the diplopic images in the 9 positions of gaze. So all of you might have seen a diplopia chart and how it's being done. So what is the method of doing diplopia charting? The patient has to be seated comfortably with the head erect and preferably in a dim lit room. And by convention, you use red glasses in front of the right eye. We always remember R in front of R, which is red glass in front of the right eye. So you can have specialized goggles which are called as Armstrong goggles. So this is the Armstrong goggles. This is my patient wearing the Armstrong goggles. So Armstrong goggles is nothing but a red and green anaglyph glasses, which dissociates your eyes. So basically, if you look through the red glass, you are able to see the red image. Okay, and through the green glass, you are able to see the green image. These are complementary colors, and that is how it works. It's better to use Armstrong goggles because you can see that there is a good cover of all the orbit, so that in all the positions of gaze, you can have the patient look through the glasses. Sometimes it's not, if it is not covered laterally, the patient may not be seeing the image through the glasses. So Armstrong goggles serve this purpose. And this is the source of light which our optometrist is using. Basically, you can use a streak retinoscope or a special kind of torch in which you have a slit in the center. So this is a torch with a stenopic slit held in front of it. And the conventional distance is 1 meter or half meter. In the record, you actually have to mention at what distance it was done. And first test the primary positions and then test other 9 positions of gaze. So this is the method how to do a diplopia charting. And when do you do a diplopia charting? You can do in all cases in which the patient has binocular diplopia, and especially it is useful in cases of concomitant strabismus for monitoring the course of the disease and also for assessing the effect of surgery or other management. And these are 2 charts which I have taken from the net. So you can, the correct way of doing it is like this. If the patient is having horizontal diplopia, you use a vertical source of light for eliciting the diplopia. And if the patient is complaining of vertical diplopia, you use a horizontal source of light. So this is, first image is a horizontal diplopia, and the second image is that of a vertical diplopia. So actually you can do it in these 2 different ways. So in the first image, you can see that the patient is seated comfortably, and the examiner is using her streak retinoscope to project the light onto the wall. The patient is wearing the red-green Armstrong goggles, and the patient will be seeing this single light as either red or green if the patient has diplopia, if there is dissociation. So this is one way of doing it. This is the most preferred way or the less confusing way. And this lower part, you can see how the charting is done. Suppose the patient has a right lateral rectus palsy. Here you have the 9 positions of gaze, and you have the red and the green images L indicates left and R indicates right. So right is written in red, which means the patient is wearing red goggles in front of the right eye and green goggles in front of the left eye. And you can have the diplopia charted. So you can also do it in another way. You can hold the streak retinoscope in front, or the torch with a slit in front of the patient, and you can actually plot the plot the diplopia as the examiner sees it. So if you look at these two charts, it might seem little confusing. The first one is how the patient sees it. So patient is wearing red in front of the right eye. So this is how the patient appreciates her diplopia. Okay, so this is perhaps the easiest way to do it and the less confusing way. We prefer to do it. And this is also right. Here the examiner, patient is reporting her diplopia, and the examiner records this as the examiner sees it. Both are right, but conventionally now we better use patient's view. So how to interpret the chart? So first note whether the chart is plotted or recorded in the patient's view or examiner's view. If it is the patient's view, this is quite simple, right and left as the patient sees it. Okay. If it is in the examiner's view, you actually have to reverse the images for your understanding to make out the right and left. So stick on to one. Maybe you should stick on to recording in patient's view. And actually you can write in the chart also in the initial stages. Then the next thing would be to understand whether the patient has a horizontal diplopia, vertical diplopia, or a torsional diplopia, or a combined kind of diplopia. So as I told, horizontal diplopia we elicit by using vertical slit, and vertical diplopia by horizontal slit. Torsional diplopia, actually you can have a tilt of the images. This will be explained in detail in further slides. So after understanding what kind of vertical or horizontal or combined, the next step would be to look for the positions of diplopia. So a patient having an concomitant strabismus, in certain positions of the gaze, patient may experience double vision. But whereas in other position, the patient may have a fused image or a single image. So you have to elicit, or you have to, from the record, you have to find out first which all positions our patient has double vision. Okay. Then the next thing would be to elicit the position of maximum separation. This is quite simple. First, look onto the chart, make sure whether it is patient's view and don't confuse the sides. Look for the positions in which the patient has diplopia, and then find the position of maximum separation. Okay. So this is a diplopia charting. You can see the right and left sides marked. So as I told, let's go by each of these steps. So the patient has vertical images here. So we understand that it is a horizontal diplopia, first thing. Second, look for the positions in which the patient has diplopia. You can see the patient has double images in primary position, elevation, depression, dextroversion, dextro elevation, dextro depression, right? And in the left gaze, the patient has a single image only. Okay. The next step is to find out the position of maximum separation of the maximum horizontal separation, in this case, of the images. So you can see that this patient has maximum separation in right gaze, and out of this is slightly higher. So the patient has maximum separation in dextroversion. Okay, I hope it's clear for everyone. And then so you just think of a patient with maximum separation of images in dextroversion. So now we have to think about what are the possibilities. So just think about what are the muscles responsible for dextroversion. So everyone would be answering this, because it is either the right lateral rectus or the left medial rectus, right? Either it is the right lateral rectus or the left medial rectus. Okay. Right lateral rectus or the left medial rectus. So this is a useful thing which you can remember. the farthest image usually belongs to the paretic eye. So we should understand that the farthest image or the dimmer image belongs to the paretic eye. So this is the first step in analyzing a diplopia chart. So these are the two possibilities. Either it could be a right lateral rectus palsy or a left medial rectus palsy. Okay. Then comes the next question. We have to single out the muscle responsible. So now I have kept this photograph because you just try to imagine in your mind that this patient wearing this glasses is seeing this kind of diplopia. Okay, so this patient has a red glass in front of the right eye and green glass in front of the left eye, and the patient is seeing maximum separation of images in dextroversion. So look at the farthest image, which is green. Okay, to see this green image has to come from her left eye, right? Just think for a moment. If she has to see this green image, it has to come from her left eye. So her left eye is producing this green image, and which is the farthest image, and usually it belongs to the paretic eye. So here comes the concept of crossed diplopia or uncrossed diplopia, because if you are wearing a right glass in front of the right eye and seeing red image to the extreme right, it is not crossed or it is uncrossed. But if you are seeing green image onto the right, it means that image is seen by the left eye, because green glasses are in front of the left eye. So that if she is seeing a green image, it is a crossed diplopia, and if it is a red image, it is a uncrossed diplopia. Some of you may be a little bit confused here. I know that it's quite common, but so again, the possibilities here are right lateral rectus palsy and left medial rectus palsy. And with this bit of information, we can again think that as the patient has green image on the extreme right. This image has to come from, if it is green, it has to come from the left eye. Okay, and it has to be a cross diplopia. So this plotting is that of a patient with left medial rectus palsy. So if I can have a, this is written as self-test, but any of the PGs can volunteer. Just go by the steps which I have mentioned, and let's analyze this. So somebody can volunteer, anyone can actually unmute themselves and then try to answer this. The question is, what is the muscle involved? Shabiba, very good, Shabiba. Thank you for coming forward. And then I don't want to know the answer. Actually, I want you to analyze step by step. So the first question would be, you know right and left, it is plotted like this. Which is the position of maximum separation? Please answer that.
Levo version.
Levo version, that's good. And then look at the images. The patient is having
Uncrossed
okay.
diplopia.
Okay,
Yes.
the patient is wearing green glasses in front of the left eye.
Left.
And the patient is seeing green image to the left side. So the possibilities here are left lateral rectus palsy, or it could be a right medial rectus palsy. Okay, and Shabiba has singled out into left lateral rectus palsy.
Lateral rectus palsy.
Very good. So a lateral rectus produces what kind of diplopia? Crossed or uncrossed?
Uncrossed.
Shabiba is right. Thank you for coming forward, and I hope you stay. There are further questions also for the benefit of everyone. Okay, so instead of confusing yourself and then analyzing in each case whether it is crossed or uncrossed, there is a simple trick to remember this, which we all use. Just study the sentence. All recti except lateral rectus produce cross diplopia, and obliques produce uncrossed diplopia. So all recti except lateral rectus produce cross diplopia, which means lateral rectus produce uncrossed diplopia. So do obliques. So just remember this, and then you will be able to answer the questions before without much difficulty during your OSCE or exams. So again, as she rightly told, this is a left lateral rectus palsy because all recti except lateral rectus produce cross diplopia, and lateral rectus typically produces an uncrossed diplopia. This is on the left side with maximum separation. So this is a left lateral rectus palsy. Okay, so let's go on further. Horizontal muscles are easy to analyze because they only have more or less only one function, either abduction or adduction. But when you see a tilted image, it could be because of dysfunction of the oblique muscles or either of the vertical recti, which means superior rectus or inferior rectus, because they do have a torsional component also as their actions. So if you see something like this and a vertical diplopia, because the plotting is horizontal, you can single out as 4 muscles. Either it could be 2 obliques, either of the 2 obliques, or either of the 2 vertical recti. So this is a case of inferior rectus palsy. Here I'll analyze it for you. The patient has double images in primary position and in the down gaze, levoversion and also dextroversion, with maximal separation of the images here. So this is indicative of a left inferior rectus palsy because the patient has a vertical diplopia along with a tilt. So you can see that patient may have a problem in primary gaze, but you have to elicit the position of maximum double vision or maximum displacement of the images. And again, like this, you can have a superior rectus palsy plotting like this, where the maximum separation is in elevation and abduction. So this is the superior rectus associated with a tilt. Because superior rectus is a intorter, you can see that the image is a little bit tilted. Again, this is the inferior oblique palsy where you have maximum separation of images in elevation. This is the left superior oblique palsy where you can see there is maximum superior oblique palsies are quite common. So please look at this graph plotting carefully. You have maximum separation of images in this position, which is the direction of action of superior oblique muscle. So superior oblique muscle has is an intorter. So the patient will have, in addition to the vertical diplopia, a tilt also. So diplopia charting is quite simple if you understand it in this way. Just try to analyze which is the position of maximum separation, whether the diplopia is horizontal, vertical, tilted or combined, and then try to analyze whether it is crossed or uncrossed. And just remember this adage, all recti except lateral rectus produce cross diplopia, which means lateral rectus will produce an uncrossed diplopia and obliques also do produce the same. And most important thing is that diplopia chart is a single investigation and never interpret the diplopia chart in isolation. So if you are asked in your OSCE about this exams, so you can analyze the diplopia chart, and then the next question would be, what are the other tests you would like to do in this patient? And so go by the clinical signs and answer the question like that. So in a single muscle, it is quite easy to point to which muscle is involved. But if it is multiple muscle involvement, it is a bit tricky. Diplopia charting may not be able to give you a full picture of the multiple muscles, and you might be confused. And also in cases of small paresis, diplopia charting may produce subtle changes, but it will be difficult to interpret. So we are going into the next part, which is a Hess screen. This is nothing but a diplopia charting kind of device. But the principle of a Hess screen is much different from that of a diplopia charting. And I'll explain about this. So this is the Hess screen. Many institutions, most of the institutions do have this. This is especially useful for treatment of concomitant strabismus. For example, a patient with 6th nerve palsy, initially the patient has a deviation, and then you have to monitor if the deviation is reducing. This can be plotted at each visit using a Hess chart, and quite it can be analyzed in that way. Also, the response to surgery can be analyzed in cases with diplopia. So this is a gray screen, and the important thing is Hess charting. The principle of Hess charting is foveal projection. Okay, so it is the image from the fovea that we are analyzing in a Hess chart, because you are dissociating the two eyes by either anaglyph, red and green anaglyph glasses as used in a Hess chart, or there is something called as a Lee screen where you use a central mirror to separate the eyes. So the eyes are dissociated and the projection, one image is projected to one eye and the patient is asked to point towards that particular corresponding image by the other eye. I'll explain it in detail in the coming slides. And Hess chart works because we have these important laws, Herring's and Sherrington's laws. This is the principle behind. Foveal projection is the principle behind Hess chart. Also dissociation and Herring's and Sherrington's laws are also involved. This is the most important thing. Hess charting can be successfully done only in patients with a normal retinal correspondence. Suppose you have a ARC, which is abnormal retinal correspondence. So Hess charting has no value because Hess charting depends upon foveal projection. It is to be done only in cases with normal retinal correspondence. So this is a patient undergoing Hess charting. You can have a manual Hess screen or an electronically operated chart. This I have taken from internet. Again, the patient is wearing Armstrong goggles, red before the right eye. And this chart is characteristically done at 50 centimeters. Okay, the distance is fixed and maintaining the distance is very important for interpretation. And each eye is fixing in turn. By convention, left eye first. So in the plots also, we use the left eye. And this patient is carrying a torch. So this is called a Foster torch. Actually, in my DNB examination, this was the question asked to me. What is the name of this torch or something like that? So the patient holds the green torch and the examiner holds the red torch. So the examiner will be pointing towards a particular spot on the Hess chart, and the patient has to indicate, the examiner uses the red light and the patient has to indicate that light, that point using a green torch. So this is another thing which we call another charting called as a Lee screen. The principle is same. You can see that there is a central mirror separating the two eyes. So this patient, this is the examiner's hand and you have a charting here. The examiner is pointing towards a particular point. So the patient is seeing this point with her right eye. Okay. And right eye cannot see the screen. Only the left eye can see the screen. So the patient has to point towards this corresponding point on her left side by making use of the left eye. So this is the examiner pointing towards and this is the patient pointing towards the corresponding image. So this is a Lee screen. Both the principles are same. Hess chart is more commonly used. And this is called a Hess chart. Other one is a Hess screen. So the record or the plotting of a Hess screen is called as a Hess chart. So here you have multiple small squares. So this is the central point or the point of primary position. And then you have three small squares which form the boundary, which lead to a smaller square. And there is a bigger square also in the outer, a pulled up square actually. So each small square subtends an angle of 5 degrees at the fovea. That is the importance of this chart. Each small square subtends a 5 degrees at the fovea. So suppose the patient has primary position here. This indicates that there is a 5 degree deviation. If it is here, it indicates 1, 2. That is, there is 10 degree of deviation. So here it is 15 degree. So the smaller square indicates 15 degree of deviation, and the larger square actually you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This indicates 30 degrees. And the action of the muscles are plotted. So you have the medial and lateral recti, superior rectus, and the inferior rectus, inferior oblique, and superior oblique. So this is smaller square is for the central 15 degree, and the larger square is plotting the outer 30 degree. So this is conventionally left eye here and right eye here. Okay, so this is the HES chart. As the patient performs the HES screen or the Lee screen, the examiner has to note the point in the HES chart. The interpretation of HES chart is very simple, but we tend to make it very complicated. So look for only these things. Don't look anything else. Look for the position, size, shape of the chart. Measurement, of course, it's there. I'll explain each of this. So this is a HES chart of a patient. This is the right eye floating and this is the left eye floating. So let's try and find out the primary position. So as I told, this is the smaller square and this is the central point of the smaller square. So this is the primary position, actual position. But the patient's primary position is here. Okay, which means 1, 2, 3. The primary position is shifted about 15 degrees laterally and also a little bit, maybe a 2.5 degree down. This means the position of the central point indicates the primary position. So this is the patient's primary position when fixing with the right eye. So this patient is likely to have a right exo deviation with a little bit of hypotropia. And whereas in the left eye, this is the central position and the patient has a hyper deviation about 5 degrees. So as you see a HES chart, first look at the central point and what is the patient's central point. And this position of the field indicates the position of the eyes because this patient has a deviation of 15 degrees towards the right, which means the position of the patient's eyes is 15 degree exo. So this is about position. And the second thing which we have to look is the size. So when you get a plotting like this is the right eye, this is the left eye. So first question to answer is about the primary position. And the second question would be, which is the smaller field? So when you look these two, you can clearly see that this is the smaller field. So smaller field belong to the primarily affected eye. So for a patient with this plotting, the primarily affected eye is this eye, which is right eye. Okay, so you can look into the smaller squares also and then the bigger squares also. So the second point is smaller field belongs to the primarily affected eye. And then again, this is our old chart. Again, you can tell me which is the primarily affected eye. It's quite clear. This is the smaller field. So this should be the primarily affected eye, which in this case is the right eye. If you look carefully, you can see that here there are two squares or square-like shapes, inner one and outer one. But here the examiner is able to plot only one square. So this should be the inner square. So the patient has huge overactions here and the examiner is not able to plot the outer square. So outer field is useful for showing more subtle changes like small paresis, etc. will not be detected sometimes in a inner field plotting, but it could be easily picked in an outer field plotting. The next thing should be the shape of the plottings. So we have looked position, size, and shape. So look at the shape. So if you look, let's consider the left eye. So you have inner square and you have the outer square. So this is the inner square of the HES chart. And then if you see that this particular muscle has a little bit of displacement interior. So any displacement interior are called as underactions and any displacement exterior are called overactions. So this patient has a little bit of interior displacement here and which is indicative of the action of the superior oblique muscle. And if you look at the outer square also, this is the boundary of the outer square, but you have a displacement interior. So this is an underacting superior oblique. Whereas when you look at the right eye, you have, this should be the inner square plotting, but our patient has a little bit of funny elongation on this side, which is a displacement exterior to the smaller field. which is an overaction. Okay, so there is a corresponding overaction in the outer field also. So this slide is just to make sure that you look at the shape of the plot, and any underactions and overactions are to be picked up like this. Just look at the original square and then find out your patient's whether it is interior or exterior. If it is an interior, it is an underaction. If it is exterior displacement, it is overaction. I hope it's clear. And then what do you see here? So this is a little bit of curious kind of plotting, and the shape looks very bizarre. You have a elongated or a stretched in opposite directions kind of plotting. So this is indicative of mechanical causes, and you cannot actually explain it with any kind of neurological sequel. So the shape will also help you in sorting out whether it is a mechanical cause or a neuroparalytic cause. Again, I think you should be very, you should have heard about this term called as spread of comitance. In any incomitant squint, early stages, you have a set of sequences, a primary muscle, and then this palsy can lead to many other underactions and overactions, which are based upon Herring's and Sherrington's law. And after some time, a incomitant squint may also appear like a comitant squint. It will be difficult to pick out which is the primarily affected muscle. So this is called comitization or spread of comitance. So this is a very favorite question by almost all the strabismologists, and you should understand. It's very simple. I'll just try to recap it very quickly. So if a muscle is palsied, you know, there will be underaction of that particular muscle. And there will be, the second step would be an overaction of the yoke muscle. Why? Because of Herring's law, there should be yoke muscle is the synergist of the palsied muscle in the opposite eye. For example, if, as we talked in the previous example, in a right lateral rectus palsy, what is the yoke muscle? Left medial rectus is the yoke. Yoke muscle belongs to the opposite eye, and it is opposite synergist. So the first step is the underaction of the palsied muscle. Second one is the overaction of yoke. And then, according to Sherrington's law of reciprocal innervation, there is overaction of the ipsilateral antagonist, which means in a case of right lateral rectus palsy, ipsilateral antagonist is right medial rectus. So there is overaction of the ipsilateral antagonist. And then the fourth step is underaction of the antagonist of the yoke, which is the yoke muscle here is left medial rectus, and the antagonist of the yoke is left lateral rectus. So if a patient initially had a right lateral rectus palsy, after some time, he might have a left medial rectus overaction. After again, he might have a right medial rectus overaction. Then he might even, after many years or many months, he might have a left lateral rectus underaction also. So this last step is called as inhibitional palsy, which is underaction of the antagonist of the yoke. You have to read it again and make it yours. This concept is very important. So why I told this here is, when looking into the shape of a diplopia chart, actually you can say whether it is a new onset palsy or a late onset kind of palsy. Because in a new onset palsy, as I told, these spread of comitance may not have happened. Okay, so the patient will have considerable difference in the size of two plots. So here you can see this is a left superior oblique palsy, and then the left plot is smaller, and there is an overaction of the right inferior rectus muscle. There is a considerable size difference between the two plots, which is indicative of a new onset palsy, where the spread of comitance has not happened. But look at the lower plot. This is also a superior oblique palsy, but the size here remains almost the same. This is because of spread of comitance. So as looking into a diplopia chart size, you will also be able to elicit the spread of comitance. The last thing, which is little not that important, but again, you will be able to measure the deviation also. As I told, this which kind of palsy is this? This is a right lateral rectus palsy. So the primary position is here, and the patient's primary position is displaced because the patient has a esotropia on the right eye. And then how much displacement is there? It is 5 degrees. Small square is 5 degrees. So the patient has 5-degree esotropia. And then similarly in the left eye, when the patient is fixing with the right eye, in the left eye, the patient's primary position is 2 divisions away, which means the patient has 10-degree esotropia. Okay, so this also explains primary and secondary deviation. The patient has a lateral rectus palsy in the right eye. So this plot is with fixing with the left eye. When the patient is fixing with the right eye, again the secondary deviation is manifest. So you all always know that secondary deviation is a deviation measured with when fixing with the palsied eye. So here it tells you exactly this. Secondary deviation is more than the primary deviation. So there are a lot of things which this chart is hiding. Only you should have eyes to and then knowledge to understand this. So I think any of the PGs can unmute and let's try to analyze some of the questions. Smallest field belongs to the which eye?
Involved eye, right
Yeah.
eye. So there is
Right eye.
underaction of the lateral rectus,
Very good.
and there is overaction of the left eye medial rectus.
So these are the 2 steps. Overaction of the yoke muscle is also there. And then in the right eye, do you have any overaction?
Yes, ma'am.
In the right eye, also you have a medial rectus overaction, as we talked about in the spread of comitance. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So this is a right lateral rectus palsy.
Right, left.
Right lateral rectus palsy. But again, there is no institutional palsy has not happened. So probably this is a recent onset kind of right lateral rectus palsy. Okay, thank you, Shabiba. You can unmute yourself. So this is the next question. So somebody else can come forward. It's fun this way. So as she rightly told, the smallest field belongs to the right eye. So the right eye is the primarily affected eye. And if you look at the position, primary position, it is shifted towards the lateral side and little bit of hypotropia is also there because this is the primary position and the patient's primary position is plotted here. And what about overactions and underactions? Here you can see that there is gross or underaction of the medial rectus, superior rectus, inferior oblique, and inferior rectus. Okay. There is little bit of underaction towards this side also, superior oblique. But this lateral movement is more or less spared in the right eye. And there is a gross overactions in the left eye. So this is quite an easy catch. Come on, what is it? Where you have multiple palsies?
The third nerve palsy.
Very good. So this is the right oculomotor nerve palsy. So this is very simple this way, right? So you go by step, you can find out. You can even find out what is the primary deviation, what is the secondary deviation. So when this patient, I can actually see this patient looking when they are fixing with the left eye, the right eye is hypotropic and exotropic. And when the patient is fixing with the right eye, the left eye is hypertropic and exotropic. This is how a third nerve palsy looks like. And what about this one? Just go by the steps. This is a little tricky.
This is old changes.
Old
Spread of comitance.
Thread of comitance. That okay, your thought process is right, but I would just like to tell you the size of these two plots are more or less similar. That is why you told it is spread of comitance. But if you carefully look, there is a particular kind of underaction here. This is which muscle? Superior oblique.
Superior oblique.
Superior oblique in the left eye is underacting. So if you see that a superior oblique is underacting, what is its yoke muscle? Yoke muscle is in the opposite eye. Okay.
Okay.
Right
Inferior
inferior
rectus.
rectus.
Very good. Inferior rectus has a overaction. And then, so the left inferior oblique also has an overaction. So this looks like a superior rectus palsy. You are very right. But again, I would like to say that in a superior rectus palsy, more or less, it's very clear. Like you have overactions and underactions very much clear. This is actually a bilateral superior oblique palsy, which is more pronounced on the left side. Okay, but whatever you answered, your thought process is very good. And try and answer this. So this was the clue is this cannot be explained by a neurological spread of committance or neurological pattern of action. So this should be a mechanical cause. And you can see that this left eye actually it is stretched vertically. So this is a mechanical kind of squint or a restrictive kind of squint where you have gross limitation of abduction and also limitation of adduction. Okay. Whereas in the other eye, you have gross overaction of the medial rectus, mechanical cause. If it were a 6-nerve palsy, this medial rectus won't be underacting. Just think about the spread of committance. Actually, this is a Duane's retraction syndrome in the right eye. It is a mechanical kind of restrictive strabismus where you have predominant, maybe this is a type 1 or a type 3, where the lateral rectus movement is grossly restricted and also the medial rectus is involved. So this is a Duane's retraction syndrome. If you see a pulled up chart or which is stretched in opposite directions, just vote in favor of mechanical causes. You will be mostly right with that. And then what is this? Somebody to answer? So look, which is the smaller field. Smaller field belongs to the left eye. So this is the primarily affected eye. This is not a mechanical palsy because it doesn't look very much compressed or stretched out. And here you can have maximum amount of deviation over the side, which is superior rectus and also in the direction of inferior oblique. Primary position, the eye is hypotropic and the other eye is hypertropic, and then there is a lot of overactions in the upper gaze. So here, 2 elevators of the eye are not functioning properly. So that is the clue. This is a monocular deviation. Otherwise, you call double elevator palsy. Now the preferred term is monocular elevation deficit. This is quite simple, right? So what about this? Again, similar one. So the patient has a smaller field on the right eye. So right eye is the primarily affected eye. And in the right eye, you can see there is a gross underaction in the side of inferior oblique muscle, whereas superior rectus is not that affected. So anybody with the differential diagnosis, you can continue, whoever is answering. Okay,
Hello,
so can you answer? Very good. That's a very nice answer because that's a very nice answer because this could be an inferior oblique palsy also, but and it looks like a neurological kind of field, but actually this is a kind of Brown syndrome where elevation in adduction is restricted. Very stellar answer for that. And what is this? What do you see? Smaller field belongs to the left eye. There is limitation of elevation of both the elevators. There is limitation of depression with gross overactions of elevation and depression in the opposite eye. And since it is a pulled up vertical chart, we tend to believe that it could be a mechanical kind of restriction. So
Thyroid eye disease. No?
Thyroid eye disease. Actually,
Thyroid,
this is
nice to like.
thyroid
Yes.
is a, maybe it could be a thyroid, but this is a left orbital floor fracture where you have limitation of movement because of inferior rectus entrapment or something. The eye cannot move up, eye cannot move down, but opposite eye is overacting. So this is a left orbital floor fracture. See, it is very beautiful to pick out the patient's clinical condition by just looking into the HIS chart. So it's a very beautiful investigation, I think, but you have to go step by step to analyze, and then it's quite a challenge. So this brings me to the end of your test, and I hope you have enjoyed and you have interacted with all the limitations, but it's some answers were really good. So just think systematically in any case of HES chart or diplopia chart. And one more thing which I would like to say is that, see, Hess charting, because of foveal projection, you are seeing the, this is a little different from diplopia charting. Diplopia charting, if you are having a problem, the principles are different. And so I will not confuse you, that's what is better, I think. So just to recap, the smallest field belongs to the primarily affected eye, and you have to look for the position of maximum separation and elicit underactions on overactions, and also think of the development of muscle sequel also in some cases. So that's my presentation about diplopia and Hess charting, and thank you so much. So as PGs, I think diplopia charting, everybody has a little kind of dizziness associated with this. Just go systematically, you will be able to solve that and face your fears. And sometimes as a PG, I think most of the biggest fear is the fear of looking stupid. So face that fear first, and don't feel embarrassed to answer questions, because sometimes you may be right, mostly you may be right, or you may be learning a new thing also, while others keep themselves quiet. So thank you for your patient listening. So if you have some questions, I can try to answer those.
There is one question in the chat box. How do we know it is a crossed or uncrossed diplopia if it is
Okay.
showing a vertical diplopia?
Okay, that's a very relevant question, and sometimes when as we get stuck there, because I'll take my slide. This is quite easy, because vertical diplopia, crossed or uncrossed, we know. And I would like you to go by this adage, and this solves all your problems. Again, in case an oblique muscle, okay, just try and understand that left inferior rectus palsy, if there is a maximum separation of images on the side, you find out which muscle is involved first, and then go by this mnemonic. Then you will understand that it is crossed or uncrossed. The principle to explain, it's a little difficult, but maybe in another session we could have a detailed interpretation. Same with the foveal projection and how diplopia is different. So just for the PG purpose, I think this is enough. Just understand that all the obliques produce uncrossed diplopia, and all the recti, except lateral rectus, produce crossed diplopia. And then you see which muscle is primarily involved, and just apply that mnemonic here. So here it is left inferior rectus palsy. So all recti except lateral rectus produce cross diplopia. So left inferior rectus palsy produces a cross diplopia. So this is the cross diplopia. Okay.
I think I will ask you questions on behalf of the PGs.
Please.
You said it is important to keep the head straight while doing diplopia charting and Hess charting, madam. Could you just explain
Yeah.
why
Because
exactly?
yeah, because the field of action of muscle is always described with the head straight. So if you are changing your head, the field of action of muscle may be different, and also more muscles will come into the field you are examining. For example, just remember the procedure when you are checking for a superior oblique palsy or a Parkes three-step test. With each head tilt or each head turn, a face turn, you are actually eliciting different positions. So this is very important to keep the head straight, because primary field of action of the muscle has to be elicited, and this is possible only if the head is kept straight. And also the distance is also important, though for a Hess chart, Lee screen you cannot go wrong because it is fixed there, and Hess chart also you have to make note that it is fixed at 50 centimeters. For diplopia charting is a little bit cruder kind of version, where you can keep it 1 meter or 50 centimeter or even the half meter. Just make a mention in your recording.
After all this, which one would you prefer, madam? If you feel that the patient is having an concomitant strabismus, what
Yeah.
test would you prefer? Would you go with the diplopia charting or the Hess charting? Or I am
See,
rather trying to ask you what are the advantages and disadvantages on
yeah,
each side?
any kind of patient with diplopia, you can actually do a diplopia charting. It is a very simple OP procedure which takes less than 1 or 2 minutes. It can be done by any busy practitioner, and with correlating all the clinical signs, you can actually point out what is the defect in most cases. And if you have an incomitant strabismus which needs to be evaluated, which needs to be monitored, then Hess charting gives you a more objective kind of interpretation. But again, it requires the patient to have a very cooperative and reliable estimation and good comprehension also. So I would say that each device has its own role. And Lee screen is also good, but mostly Hess chart is preferred in many places. So it's not like one is better over the other. Of course, each has its own advantages, and then you have to compare and then make customized to your own clinical situation. And always try to analyze these charts and investigations in conjunction with the patient's clinical state. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. Sometimes in a very large squint, actually, even though it is an acquired squint, when we do a diplopia charting, the patient may say that he is seeing only one image because the other image is too far away. So in that situation, what do we need to do?
And that you have to, I think that is a common situation, and then you have to use your common sense and understand that because the displaced image is too far, the patient is not able to elicit it. So that's a very important point which you have to remember while doing this. And another point which I forgot to mention is sometimes the patient may say that the patient sees only one image. In fact, you are expecting a double image on that side. So it may be because of a prominent nose also. If the patient has a prominent nose, the image from the other eye may be blocked by that prominent nose. So in that case, you expect a double image, but actually you're able to elicit only one image. Another case is a patient with suppression. So if the patient has amblyopia or suppression, you expect double images, but because of long-standing suppression and sensory changes, patient may have perceive only one image. So these are also two situations which you have to keep in mind.
And could you just highlight the common mistakes that are done by people who do diplopia charting or Hess charting from your own experience?
Yeah, most important thing is positioning the patient, and then the distance from the patient, and then when you plot in the chart, you try to stick on to the patient's view because it's easy to interpret also. You try, if you confuse between both this, it's whole mess, and you will end up hating diplopia and strabismus and all. So just just go systematically, and this I think you have to try and attempt to plot a few charts, a few fields. Then only you will be more conversant with that, and then that practice and understanding the concepts and going systematically helps. So and the head position has to be correct, and the examiner the eye level has to be maintained, and the patient should be instructed properly. You can actually ask a patient to, if there are two images, you can actually ask the patient to hold one green pencil and red pencil and to indicate the horizontal vertical separation with those pencils. Even patients, intelligent patients will tell you the tilt also. So here it is, you can just have your diagnosis from the patient's mouth. Okay.
I don't find any more questions. We have around 40 people listening to the talk. I think
That's
of them are.
yeah. So if there are no more questions, once again, thank you from my side to KOS. I hope everyone goes back to their patients, and once they see them, they will try eliciting this, and you will be more comfortable with those. Okay.
Wonderfully explained, Sanitha. Good job.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sanitha.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay.
for making such a difficult topic so easy for the postgraduates. I would invite Dr. Suma to give the vote of thanks.
Sanitha, it was very excellent presentation. You did it very well. I am sure that our pages have benefited out of this well-explained session. Very good job you did. And in spite of your busy schedule, you have spent a lot of time for us for teaching our postgraduates on behalf of our Kozhikode Ophthalmic Society and my own personal behalf, I express our sincere gratitude towards you. And
Thank you.
Nirmal, you did a very good job moderating efficiently. Because
you, ma'am.
pages were not
The job
answering,
was
but
easy.
you have you have enough questions for her on behalf of pages.
Thank
So
you,
you
ma'am.
did a very good job, and thank you
Yeah,
for
I think the moderator's job is a very good job.
Now I thank our dynamic president, Dr. Vijayalakshmi, and our energetic Dr. Sujit, who is doing all this background work for making our this PG session very grand success. No? So he is doing all the background work for materializing such a very good academic work. You are coordinating very so efficiently so that it was very smooth for our PGs. I thank, on behalf of our Kozhikode Ophthalmic Society, I thank all the pages who have took part in very large numbers. Even though they didn't answer, I know they know very well, but they are very shy also. That's why they are not answering. Don't think otherwise, Sabita.
No,
They
I never
understood it
think
very
otherwise. Yeah,
well.
hope.
They are shy as usual. Okay. Finally, I thank our Sergeant, Mr. Sergeant of Sun Pharma for providing a very nice virtual platform for us. Without any disturbance, we could conduct it very smoothly. Thank you once again, all, on behalf of myself and Kozhikode Ophthalmic Society. That was very wonderful job, and we got very good feedback from our pages. So this time also they will do like that only. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Mihir. Thank you,
Thank
Mihir,
you,
once
madam.
again
Thank
for the
you.
fourth
And
module going very
please, all of
successfully,
you,
Mihir.
yeah, thank you, ma'am. And all of you, please stay tuned. Next week, same time, we have retina topics coming up, B scan and retinal lasers, and they will be dealt in detail by Dr. Biju John from RIO Trivandrum. So don't forget to join next week, same time, 7 p.m. Saturday. So thank you all. Bye and good night.